The Aurora Theater trial dominated the summer of 2015 and it rehashed the national discussion of the death penalty in addition to mental health issues. Although the perpetrator in this case, as well as the defendant in the Farrows Bar trial, were both sentenced to life in prison, with the impending case of the shooter of the Colorado Springs Planned Parenthood facility, the discussion is sure to come back around. Patty, what do you feel as you look back at both the Aurora Theater trial, which was the biggest one, the Farrows trial? What are some of the things you took back from it?
Well, the Farrows trial is the quicker one to deal with, which is I can't believe they really went with they tried to get the death penalty in Denver. We know in Denver juries just don't go for death penalties. So in that case, they wasted some time on it. But when you talk about the real waste of time, the James Holmes tragedy, the poor victims and their friends who had their survivors who had to continue on and go through, wait years before the trial came, when there could have been a plea agreement where we would have seen James Holmes locked up for his entire life. That was just a shame because what we wound up with is James Holmes locked up for his entire life. But when I talked about grumpy and tense, these trials are going to bring us back to grumpy and tense again. When we talk about Robert Deere, it brings up the issue of the death penalty. The state is still has mixed feelings on it. We've not had the discussion we wanted to have. We are going to talk about mental health again. We still have not solved how do you identify these people who are going to go out and shoot. And you know what? It's not going to be their passport. These are Americans in this country who have not been identified as someone who is going to go out and do something so heinous. And we're also going to be talking about guns again. So we are going to be Trumpy a lot on these issues next year.
I think that's a very good way to put it. David, it looks, I think with the Aurora Theater trial, there were some people split in the community of even wanting to go through it. Some people understood that some of the victims did want to see the trial take place. Some of them just wanted to see a plea deal and go through with it. At the end of the day, what do you think the effect of the trial has made for the community?
I think it was constructive, and I think the District Attorney Brockler's decision to seek a capital sentence was based on careful consultation with the large majority of the families of the victims, and certainly some of the surviving victims who were seriously wounded. The trial went very well. This was the opposite of the nadir of the American criminal justice system in our memories, the O.J. Simpson trial. The lawyers on both sides were very good and professional. The judge was very good, and the jurors who ended up making the final decisions were conscientious and thoughtful. They rejected the claim that Holmes was not guilty because of his mental illnesses. They rejected the claim that mitigating factors outweighed the many aggravating factors, and they exercised their choice under Colorado law, by which a fairly small minority of the jury can veto the death penalty. Part of the conversation we can have about the death penalty going forward is, do we want to allow, if you have 11 for execution and 1 against, the Constitution doesn't require unanimity on that phase of the case. We could change that, and maybe we should have a conversation about doing that. On mental health, as we're now continue to be concerned about that, but also about terrorism, I think it's important we sort of stop this idea that mass attacks on strangers or semi-strangers are in these different categories of things. There is an overlap between terrorism and mental health. People can have ideological motivations. James Holmes didn't, but others do, including the San Bernardino people. But the San Bernardino perpetrator, his father is, according to the mother's divorce papers, bipolar and alcoholic. There was a guy in London not long ago who tried to cut people's throats on the subway, and just 2 weeks before he attempted that, the family had tried to do something about his mental health problems. So people can be motivated by official ideologies, but many, not all, many of those who are the most likely to take that idea and turn it into a violent mass crime are people with mental health problems. So I think it continues to be a good idea to see the different ways we can expand the mental health safety net, both in Colorado and nationally.
Eric, around this table throughout 2015, we talked about the mental health issue. We also talked about the conversation about death penalty. There needs to be a conversation, but I'm not really sure that there's a lot of political will among leaders to have that conversation. Even after the fact now, do you think there's anyone out there, political leader-wise, that wants to say, hey, we said early in 2015 we need this conversation, let's talk about it, let's make an amendment to that we need a unanimous vote, or any even facet of it. Is there political will to make it happen?
I don't see any leaders who really want to have this conversation. I mean, I think there are probably some conservative leaders who want to score some political points for the lack of the death penalty in some of these cases, for Governor Hickenlooper's reprieve of Dunlap, et cetera. But even if the conversation is not happening at that kind of macro level, I think the conversation is happening at a lot of micro levels around the state. And I think a consensus, I don't know if a consensus is being reached that we're opposed to the death penalty, but I think there's a practical consensus that Colorado, in my mind, has probably executed its last person. We'll see if there's now a Republican governor and the people currently on death row, maybe one of them reaches the end of the rope, bad pun. But I think the death penalty as a practical application in Colorado is probably done and probably past tense. If you cannot secure it in those cases where we saw, whether it's the Faro bar killing, whether it's the Aurora shooting the Aurora theater killing, you just don't know what circumstances you're going to secure it. And then, given that it takes 20 to 25 years to carry out sentence, what is the practical benefit of doing that as opposed to a life sentence without parole? Real quickly to the trial itself, I'm going to disagree with David on this. I mean, he's right in the sense of everyone involved conducted themselves very well. The attorneys did a fine job. The judge ran a tight ship, unlike the OJ trial or whatever. The jury did its job. But I'm much closer to Patty's point of view on this, which is for what? You ultimately had a resolution that was on the table a year or a year and a half before the whole trial began. And I understand the argument that the community had to go through this for some kind of catharsis. But I look at Tucson, where in the aftermath of the congressperson Gabby Gifford shooting, Jared Loeffner, who was the perpetrator there, they worked out a plea deal. He was equally as crazy as James Holmes was crazy. They worked out a plea deal. They saved themselves the trial. And are you telling me that Tucson was, that somehow Aurora, by virtue of this trial, was able to heal more than Tucson? I just flat don't buy it. I'm not sure what the exercise ultimately proved.
Penn, if we're going to see anything change along how Colorado currently has capital punishment, is that going to have to come from the citizens, or do you think it's possible to come from the legislature?
I don't think it's possible to come from either right now. I think what has happened between the Aurora Theater trial, the Faro's Bar trial, and the situation in Colorado Springs, and I disagree with David. I think the trials were not constructive. I think they were just the opposite. They were destructive of sort of civic peace of mind, because in every instance, in Aurora, guilty. Faro's Bar trial, guilty. The guy in Colorado Springs has already told the judge, I'm guilty. And there's this fascination with the death penalty as some sort of ultimate retribution. But as a practical matter, we can't get there as a society because we fundamentally don't have consensus and don't agree. And the question becomes, does it help the comprehensive psyche of the community to go through these trials when the bottom line in all three of the cases like this is guilty, guilty, and guilty? And if you know that, and it makes sense to put these people away, because that's why we have prisons, because there are bad people in this world, and the bad people in this world need to go there. If you want to talk about whether to kill them or not, I don't know. We need to get them away from the rest of us in society. And because of the death penalty, I think is what's created this weird coupling of the criminal justice system with the mental health system, which is why we don't make progress on either of them. We talked about this once before. I don't know if the guy in Colorado Springs is mentally ill. I think he may just be a true believer. I don't agree with him, but he may logically think this is how I act out on my beliefs. And so sanity, insanity, competent to stand trial or not, I don't think is the real barometer there. He's guilty. He killed a bunch of people. Put him away for life. If you then want to provide treatment while he's put away, maybe then you can determine if he really does have some sort of mental illness. Same with Holmes, same with the folks in the Farrell Barr situation. Put them away, protect the rest of society, and then figure out on the back end what's the treatment that may or may not be necessary at that point. And finally, I'm not convinced that all these mass shootings are because people are nuts. I think there's some people who have extreme belief systems that to you and I and to many of us we think are so extreme that they're not logical, they're not rational. But I think they connect dots in a different way and they get to a point that says, it's okay for me to do that. And we have a way to deal with those people. We need to put them away.